All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and kick off. I am Nicole McLean. I'm the head of growth marketing here at Composely, and hopefully you're all in the right spot for our end of year webinar on algorithm proofing your 2023 content strategy. We're going to dive in, walk through a little bit of some of the most recent algorithm updates to Google, kind of what happened there, what's been the impact, and then share a couple tips on what we can do to prepare ourselves for whatever they throw at us next year. Before we get started, do just want to go over a few things. So everyone in the audience today is on auto mute. Please use the chat, use the Q&A. I'm going to do my best to keep an eye on it throughout the presentation, but would love to hear your questions and going to try and leave a good amount of time at the end to answer any. Second, we are recording this. Actually, yes, we are recording this. So we are recording this and we will send you a link to view the recording. I'll send you a link to this deck. Also talk about a couple of resources that we're going to make sure we send over to you that we discuss, that you have access to everything. So sit back, relax. If you grabbed a coffee before, hopefully you can sip on it. And then finally, I'm working from home. Composely is fully remote. I'm sure a lot of you are as well. So if any technology snafu pops up, we will troubleshoot quickly and get back with you, but just ask for a little grace because you never know what can happen. So yes, again, thank you so much for joining. Before we dive in, my approach to these presentations and going to webinars and trying to incrementally get better is trying to find that at least one nugget, one shift of perspective, one little thing that you can take back and practically implement into your strategy or into some of your initiatives. Hopefully you'll have a couple more than just one, but really my goal is as you listen to this content, just find one thing that you can actually implement, take back, and just find that incremental growth. So that's our goal for today, putting ourselves in a great position for 2023. So let's go ahead and we'll get started. All right, so first off, I don't know about all of you on the call, but I know I has felt like I've been on a roller coaster for the last few weeks when it comes to Google algorithm updates. At some point, I just accepted that it felt like every other day we were hearing about tweets of little tinkering happening to the algorithm. And it's just been a little bit of, what do you do? Hold on, brace yourselves, see if you get impacted, see if you don't. And it's just been a little crazy. And from what we can tell, the continuous updating to the algorithm is going to continue. Obviously, this kind of all started in August when we heard about the new helpful content algorithm. I don't know about you, but I was very disappointed to see that we've foregone with the animal names for algorithm updates, missed the days of the panda. However, this one is very aptly named, and I definitely think gives a lot of insight into what to expect for the future. So let's just talk a little bit. We're going to take a few minutes just to make sure we're all on the same page of what was the helpful content update, what was the impact, and make sure that we're in a good spot as we talk about how to react to it. So the goal of this update, as is the goal with most algorithm updates for Google, is just to provide higher quality content that better matches the search intent for the user, making sure that they don't have to go to multiple sites, bounce around, and that the true intent of what they're asking for is being delivered in those top search results. A few things about this in particular, there is this idea of what is helpful content, how does Google really rank that? And it kind of goes back to this goal. So it was looking at obviously individual pieces, but also just site-wide. Does your site provide helpful content that isn't overly AI, doesn't feel spammy, is providing genuine, authoritative educational content? And it was, in a lot of cases, not just one or two pages that maybe got impacted, but could be your entire site. There were no manual penalties, so it was a little bit of just kind of guessing, managing, SEMrush, Ahrefs, your organic traffic, and seeing if you were impacted by it. And then there was a notice that it becomes more apparent as you have more content. So if you're producing multiple blogs a week, multiple blogs a month, there's an opportunity that the algorithm's going to look at that site in totality. After it happened, it took about 2 weeks. We expected, I think everyone was waiting with bated breath and just expecting their search results to tank. And we were expecting to see a lot of a lot of big hits here. And in reality, most folks saw minor changes to their organic search, but really it was just a handful of industries that were really impacted. Probably the most common example are the dreaded recipe pages where you go to figure out how to create what is the best recipe for gingerbread men, only to get a litany and an entire history of the writer's, grandmother, and the recipe came over on the Mayflower and all this stuff. And really you're like, can I just get to the heart of the recipe? I just want to get my question answered, go start making the gingerbread and move on. And that's, I think, a great example and the kind of content that we all, don't want to create. I have no idea if this is a thing, but I'm a huge Marvel Cinematic Universe fan, so I could not help but create the acronym of the HCU, the Helpful Content Update. So that's what that means if it's in there. But following that, we saw a series of additional core algorithm updates that were definitely less publicized, not quite as much information given around those. And that has led many to believe that what we thought was going to be this big impact by the HCU or the Helpful Content Update really didn't have the impact that Google was hoping for. It didn't quite achieve the goal of better matching higher quality content to the intent behind the searches. So really the goal remains the same. Like, that is what Google wants to do, is put the user front and center, deliver better content. And so we expect to see a lot more of these smaller, consistent algorithm updates. And yes, if we're talking about the MCU, had to include a GIF here. In my head, this is what Google is doing, just consistently moving everything around, tinkering with it to get it right. But this is what we can expect for 2023, is this consistent up and down, not sure what's going to happen. And as they keep tinkering and tweaking this algorithm, you might see more impact than maybe what you saw last year. So figuring out how to put out that truly helpful content is going to be more important than ever. And we are going to dive into that a little bit. So now we're going to chat through some tips to help better algorithm proof your content strategy. So going quickly through the 5, we're going to dive in and spend a little bit of time on each. But EAT, if you haven't heard, that is going to be where we're going to spend the most amount of time. That really dives into some creating that better helpful content. But I think some of these other tips are going to kind of put us on the right foundation in order to dig into that. So first, we need to write for the human behind the screen. I've said this for a while. You have B2C, you have B2B, B2G, all of the different algorithms. And a lot of us spend so much time looking at reports, and it's really easy to get lost in the data and forget that there is a human just like us sitting on the other end of the screen, trying to consume, trying to get their search queries met. And ideally, for a lot of us that are in marketing, enter into your sales funnel and build a genuine relationship with your brand where they keep coming back to you, they keep viewing you as a sense of authority, and ideally, potentially buying from you in the future. So my question to you is, as you think about this, is as you're producing content, do you pause and can you answer yes to this question? Is the content that you're producing something that you would want to read yourself? Is this something that your family members would want to read? Now, depending on your industry, your answer might change. But really, I think that should be the test of the content you're putting out is this interesting? If you were searching for this, is this something you would want to read? And if not, thinking about how to make it more compelling, understand the person and their motivations. And so this is an example of a resource that we will send you in the follow-up email, but we do have a user persona template. This is an example of what that can look like. And I would really encourage you, if you haven't already, to go beyond the demographic information. Because if you're trying to write super compelling content, yes, it's great to know maybe the region that your user's in, or the age group, or the economic status. But going a little bit deeper into some of the psychographics and understanding the why and the motivation of your audience is going to be super important. So this is a great resource to kind of work through it quickly, but have seen some really great examples of user personas where you assign a name to them Alliteration always gets extra points, but having that person that everyone in the company can refer to, and it is a built out story, or creating that narrative of what a day in the life looks like for that person. And the more you can understand that, the more that content is now going to start feeling really human, and likely going to feel more helpful and more interesting, and seeing, more engagement, longer time on page, longer read time. So first tip. As we move into the second one, this I think is one of the key elements to really locking in to seeing those SERPs go up. So focus on the search intent. We do all this keyword research, but are we assigning the intent for that keyword? Is it top of funnel, bottom of funnel? We're going to dig into actually, probably the 4 core main types of content, and dive into some examples here. So we've identified 4. Would be really curious if you think there are some others that we might be missing, but kind of going to walk through each of these and really focus on the example. So first we have, informational intent. This is your typical top of funnel, likely educational blog post, where these folks are just trying to learn more, trying to educate themselves, maybe looking for some proprietary data or something a little more objective to kind of help inform them. And this is a lot of listicles or how-tos. Might seem a little more of actually like a question, like how to do this, how to, in this case, what are the best hotels in Disney? And just kind of doing some research, seeing what's out there, and getting the lay of the land. And so in this case, have an example of, you could have a blog, which is the 5 best Disney hotels for families. Here, that's kind of assuming that your brand or the hotel is really focused on a family. So maybe a mom of 2 kids, and they're trying to plan their hotel and just understand what's going on. You have more transactional intent. So, trying to take more of an action, trying to do. And so this, for example, kind of the difference in search might be, I want to buy Disney World tickets. And then you have more of that commercial intent. So this could be more like looking at product descriptions, like a wire cutter type thing, but trying to potentially look at 2 different competitors, or get more information, likely further down the funnel, looking at that buying decision. And so here an example, keeping on theme, would be Disney World versus Universal. What are the pros and cons? Do we want to stay there? And then finally, you have navigational intent. I put this maybe a little lower in the funnel, and we'll kind of have some examples to visualize this as well. But if they are trying to search your website, or this is a branded keyword, they clearly have some background of your of your brand, and clearly know you well enough to go directly to your website. Now, they may be doing that because there was an article they really liked and they want to go back to it, or they've read and they get your newsletter and they trust you as a source of information. So that doesn't mean that they're ready to buy necessarily, but it does mean that they have a pretty strong relationship with you, that they're willing to come back. So do have a quick poll here. Curious, which intent types do you feel like you're spending most of your time working on? So I'm going to get this poll launched here, give you a couple minutes to answer. But as you're doing keyword research, as you're spending time building content, which of these 4 buckets, and you can go back a slide so you can have them pulled up, are you spending most of your time? Likely, probably a percentage of time on all of this. But I'm going to force you to kind of pick one of where you're spending that predominant amount of time. Give everyone about 10 seconds here. All right. So it looks like for most of us, we are focusing on that informational. So top of funnel, putting out those how-tos, listicles, top 10, whatever, to get folks to come to our website, interact with our brand, and start building that experience. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. So I want you to kind of maybe, pick an intent as we kind of continue on in this conversation, to maybe reflect on what you're working on and kind of reflect your content as we continue, or pick the one that you use the most often. But this is something I know I've really been challenging our team to think about, not just the intent, but how all of this overlaps with the buyer's journey and the sales funnel. So put a few visuals together just to maybe help you think about that. So this is a pretty standard buyer's journey. You know, we're big HubSpot fans here. And so I think this is a pretty simple way of looking at it. But, you know, 3 main categories as someone's moving through new revenue funnel. You know, they are where they have a problem. They're trying to gain information. They're trying to learn and educate themselves. As they move through that, they maybe become more aware of the actual solutions that could help solve their problem. So in the hotel example, they're trying to understand just, I've never been to Disney. What are the different hotels? Are there some that are more family friendly? Are there some that are more adult friendly? Some that are more expensive, less expensive? And as they start doing research, they might become aware of actual hotel names and hotel experiences. And then finally, getting into the actual brands and making the decision of where they want to stay, where they want to ultimately spend their dollars. So this might not always work well. I would probably think of this more as a diagram than necessarily a clean informational always be awareness. But I do think that oftentimes informational is going to be more at the top of the funnel. Those how-to guys, being educational, helping show your authority, building that trusting relationship. And so thinking about, okay, here are the keywords, here are the topic clusters, here's what we want to rank for. But then how does the content maybe align or could align with the broader buyer's journey? And then ultimately layering all of that on top of the sales funnel. So you have an informational blog, someone's just becoming aware of your brand. Maybe they click and sign up for your newsletter because they want to continue to get great content. Now you have a lead. And so, yes, most especially of blog posts and probably a lot of the content that we're creating on the call is going to be focused on that top of funnel. But I think it's also important, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as well later in the presentation. But I think it's important to think about where is your content at and how can it be deployed and how does it help someone through their journey. And also a big fan of Schitt's Creek, but the journey I think is so important. Part of the helpful content update is not having people have to go to multiple sites to get their answer and being able to kind of get it on the first try. And so if you have a great article or a featured snippet, for example, too, where they might not even get to your website, if they have that informational intent met, they might want to do more research. They might want to move down the funnel. And so how do you have content that's ready or leading them through this funnel? So we'll talk a little bit about different models to do that, ways you can repurpose content, but making sure you're not just thinking about getting them to the site, but how do you engage them throughout the entire funnel and kind of think about the buyer's journey of if they're, pain aware, are they solution aware, or are they actually provider aware? I'm going to pause and take a quick sip of water. The other thing to think about is their experience both on and off page. Off page is a little bit more on the technical side. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that. However, it is important that if you have good web vitals, if things load, if things are well laid out, that's going to keep them on site. And that's going to, again, some of the kind of softer side of things that are going to keep that relationship with your brand really strong. So a few things to think about on creating that experience. First and foremost, you want to get to your point quickly. We don't want to be the recipe websites where you are putting a beautiful prose at the front of it, especially, again, this really depends again on the intent. So think about maybe which intent that you spend the most time on. But if it is informational, get to the point, but then give them an opportunity to dive deeper if they want. If you have more of a transactional or commercial intent, make sure you're kind of teeing up and letting them know that they are on the right article. Their intent, their query is going to get met if they kind of dive in and commit to the rest of the piece. I also think it's important to improve readability. So using font treatments like bolding and italicizing, having a good layout. Sometimes this might mean you need development. you might need to kind of rethink how your website's laid out and how someone's going to interact with it. But having the ability to put bullets in, put tables that are well spaced, well laid out, or even images or videos to help expand on the content. This is something hopefully we are all aware of, but looked through multiple research that shows the maximum shorter paragraphs of 3 to 5 sentences max is ideal for helping people move through. If you have big blocks of text, it's often just going to feel overwhelming and your reader's not going to want to commit. Just being really diligent in kind of how you lay out the page and how you lay out that content. Again, think about your intent, kind of consider, should you match your headlines? Should those in keywords be directly in the headlines, not just because that's a great way for the bot to pick up and say, yes, this is a relevant thing, but also for your audience who's actually reading it. And then link to third party. It's great to link to third party. It adds credibility. However, as you think about your journey, you don't necessarily want to push people off your site unless there's someone that just has a lot of thought leadership and has maybe the eat and authority that you don't in a space. Absolutely link out, provide third-party credibility to what you're talking about. But also make sure you're interlinking on your own site. And this is really where that journey comes into place, is having an opportunity for them to jump the funnel. Maybe, it is schedule a demo. Likely that's going to be too aggressive, too much of a sales pitch, too fast. But having a gated piece of content, or if you have a 1,500 word blog that's answering an initial informational or transactional intent, what is something that maybe goes a little more hands-on, a little more in depth if they want more info, and kind of helping them throughout. How I would think about this is, when you call a customer service rep and you're just trying to get help, or you need someone to direct you, and then they pass you from department to department and you lose them and you have to try and get back and you don't have a number. And it's such a terrible experience. That's sometimes how our websites can feel, is if you do push them to another site and then they lose your site and they wanted to get back and do something and it's clunky or it's a hard experience. Trying to keep them focused on, or not focused, but keeping them on your website, giving them that clear path, that clear journey, is likely going to not only improve a lot of the core website vitals and other key KPIs that we talk about, like time on site, number of pages viewed, bounce rate, etc. It's kind of overall just a really great experience for them. Do want to talk about, I mentioned some off-page and on-page SEO things that you can do. Don't want to dive too deep into it for today's presentation, but we will be sharing the best practices guide that we have for on-page SEO. It's a quick checklist, something just to kind of gut check whether, how you're doing, quick ABCD on how your on-page SEO is doing. So we will be sharing this. It's also linked here in the presentation, which we'll send you, and we'll also just send you a link directly to this. So after 4 tips, we're finally at the big one, the acronym that I think has taken over SEO over the last couple of weeks, which is EAT, the expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness of your content. EAT is hard. You'll see I have 2 call outs from Lily Ray because I think she just has the best content about this. But there is no silver bullet. You can't trick your way into getting EAT. And this kind of goes back to not writing for bots and writing for the humans, the people that are actually consuming your content, and not trying to get around by putting out quick content at high volume just to satisfy the algorithm. And this takes time and it takes true authority. And if you don't have it, you're kind of sitting here saying, what do I do? How do I get it? And there's really nothing you can do except actually develop this, whether it's in-house, whether you're partnering with third parties, you're doing things like webinars or podcasts and putting them into the content that you're producing. So we are going to dive in here, talk about some examples of things you can do, and some of the challenges that you might face doing that as well. So first and foremost, have a point of view. This goes back to the first tip, which was to know your audience, to write for the human. So knowing who you're writing for, deeply understanding that, but also who you are as a business. And oftentimes these are big conversations that, if you're an individual contributor on the call, you probably can't make that decision on your own. You need to encourage your leadership team to know who you are, what are your value props and differentiators to your competitors, what is your point of view in the brand or in the market, and know where you can genuinely add thought leadership and where you can't. I was talking with someone who works on content and SEO at Adidas, and it was really interesting to hear her process where she was saying that they, do all of the research and they do the keyword analysis, and then they dive in and see what's the competitive landscape, who's outranking them. And there are certain keywords that they just know they do not have the authority or the eat to outrank. So the example she gave me is that if you had a keyword and she was looking at it and a WebMD article was outranking, was the number one SERP, Adidas wasn't going to go for number one. And they would probably deprioritize the work on that keyword and go for something else, because to them, the intent behind that is a more medically credible, really health-driven response. And Adidas is not going to have the credibility to answer that the way WebMD would. And so they recognize where they exist in the market and where they have genuine authority. And if they don't have that, they deprioritize those keywords to go put that authority in areas that they know they can absolutely crush. And so I think that is important to not only say where you can provide the authority, but where you can't, and being realistic and transparent across the company where you're just not going to outrank someone that does have that authority. The other thing is to start creating a community of experts. SMEs, the acronym's been around for a while, but fostering that both internally and having those owned entities under your brand that you can rely on, as well as partnering with external folks who are really good at something and bringing them in to collaborate, to review your content, to join webinars, podcasts, do little videos for you, etc. I would definitely look internally. So I kind of jumping a little bit to the next point, but talk to your CS team. Not every CS or delivery person is going to be a great writer, is going to be charismatic or want to be on camera, or isn't going to want to be front and center. There's a reason that they probably are going into talking with customers. But throughout my career, I have seen some incredible thought leaders come out of the CS team and people who want to educate and share the best practices they're learning, because they have the most reps. They are going to have the most experience actually doing and seeing, learning from their clients' mistakes, learning from the successes, figuring out the trends, and distilling that into something that marketing can use to share across. And so I think this is also a big thing, that it's not just customer stories. Customer stories are great. I have it as a point here later, 2 more down. And you should share that, because those are proprietary stories that your brand can own and people can learn from it. But at the end of the day, the customer story is always going to be a little bit more down market because they're using your product. But really good delivery and customer success folks can rise above the product and give you true thought leadership and authority to share in the market. One of the things I've seen work really well is most customer success leaders have some sort of health score that they use to track the health of an account and flag whether or not it's a churn risk. And typically that rubric can oftentimes be used for marketing as a best practice, turn into a quiz, turn into a self-evaluation for your prospect. Because if people are following the best practices as customers and doing what you recommend and doing the right things, if they're not doing it on the prospect side, that's a great way to create pain. So this is a little outside of algorithm proofing your content, but having that relationship and sitting down with CS and delivery, I cannot recommend that more. The other side is authors. So once you have this community, internal and external, making sure that you're telling both Google and your audience that these are genuine experts who know what they're doing. You can create, if you're in WordPress, it's a lot easier. If you're using something else, you might need to put some time into developing this. But the biggest thing here is not just saying that Joe Schmo, who has no expertise in this, is writing it. It's someone who really knows what they're doing, whether it's because have years of experience, they have firsthand experience, and making sure that bio is really focused on highlighting that expertise and that authority. I also think it's a great way to start potentially building out a future community. And so having the ability, you might need some dev support here, but having the ability that if someone likes an author, that they can then click on that author and see all of the other blogs they've reviewed, they've penned for you, and allowing people to kind of go down that funnel if they find an expert that they trust and they really like. Mentioned this already, but sharing the stories that are unique to your business. Being front and center with your customers and really sharing what they're doing, sharing their best practices, sharing something that people can follow. So this could be reviews, this could be testimonials, this could be a full-blown case study, but really making sure that you're highlighting the fact that you have customers who are successful. There's really nothing else that is more authoritative than saying, I have a customer who's achieved the goal of why they worked with us, and here's what they did, and here's how you can do that too. I feel like this is always the thing that no one has time for, but featuring proprietary data, especially if you're in tech or you have any sort of back-end dashboard that is managing what you're doing, your product team likely has a huge database that can pull some really interesting data that no one else has access to. Again, it's a lot of cross collaboration, making sure you're sitting down with your product and engineering team, seeing if they can pull that data, help analyze it with you, pull out some insights. But I think having that proprietary data not only creates that EAT, but it also creates something for someone to start linking to you. If you're just regurgitating what's already out there, why is someone going to backlink to your content over something else? But having the data, explaining how you got it, explaining why it's credible. You can also do your own surveys. So I've used something called Pollfish before that actually is a Google affiliate or a Google product where you can put in, what is your audience? What's the demographic? Who are you looking to get insights from? Here's a 5 to 10 survey or 5 to 10 question survey, and say, I want 1,000 respondents. Put it out. I think when I've done this in the past, depending on, how many segments of data you have, how long it is, it might, and of course, how many respondents you're looking for, it can range from a couple $100s into, $2,000-$3,000. But that investment for you to have data that no one else has that can inform blogs, long form pieces of content, can put on your website, can be used in sales collateral as proof points and credibility for what you're working on, is so invaluable. And so taking the time to try and get your own data, I think, is a great way to have that genuine authority. And then finally, it is understanding where your audience is on the journey. Especially doing some research for this. A lot of the folks like Search Engine Journal and Search Engine Land and such are saying, we talk too much about ourselves. If the intent is pretty high level and someone is at the beginning of their journey with you, talking super heavily about your product, your solutions, what you do, is often not true authority, is not truly answering the intent behind their search query. And so just being mindful of that and understanding where they are and really being intentional about helping them move down and not trying to push them too much before they're ready. And so just as a quick reminder of that sales funnel is, again, just thinking about where they are and having the blogs and the content, whether it's long form, audio, visual, to move them through at their own pace. So those are the 5 tips. I did refer to Search Engine Journal's State of SEO report because, like I said, EAT is hard. And a lot of folks don't have the resources they need to actually focus on EAT and tend to not have the time prioritized to build it out correctly, are asked to create short-term fixes. And while those 5 tips might seem a little obvious, or like, of course you should know your audience, of course you should create a great experience. I feel like those are the things that can so easily get deprioritized in the day-to-day minutia of just moving the business forward. And so helping your leadership team and finding the time to do it is so important. And that's what Search Engine Journal found in their reports that I found pretty interesting. So the first set of findings was, what have been the challenges over the last 12 months? And the first three all have to do with finding, to me, this is finding the time to do a lot of these best practices. So lack of resources, that could be headcount, that could be budget, that could be time. Strategy issues, and scaling the process. Because once you find something that works, how do you start producing it at the volume that's really going to help you see those impacts of the things that you're doing well? And as you look ahead at 2023, some of the things that people are focused on is interesting. So, Helpful Content Update, when we talked about at the beginning, said that they're going to ding you for using machine learning and AI content. And yes, there are some great advancements being made. And I think as those advancements continue to improve and learn and get better, it's going to produce better content for you. But one of the most emerging factors is AI. And so how do you lean into that, which can be a great cost, time, resource saving, but is it going to produce the same quality for you? Looking at Core Web Vitals, which is more of that off-page experience, I guess, and on page, how quickly it loads and what the experience is on page as well. And then EAT, obviously we talked about it's hard. You can't really trick your way through it. And so all of these things combined, to me, goes to how do you find resources? How do you make this happen, especially when a lot of folks are facing a lot of uncertainty about what resourcing is going to look like for them in 2023. So I was actually recently on a podcast and I got on this topic of how do you scale content and why should you scale content and what does that look like? So I thought it might be helpful just to share some of the best practices that we talked about on that podcast and might be helpful for you as you think about your resource planning. So first and foremost, it's going to be really hard to make a business case for whatever those resources are if your content KPIs or your organic search KPIs are not directly tied to both the broader marketing department and the company goals. So first of all, make sure you know what they are. Most leaders right now, part of why this time is so crazy is because they're trying to finish the year while also planning and creating really clear goals for 2023. And they're probably asking you for what your goals should be. And it's so hard to build those out if you don't have great understanding of what the company and overall marketing department goals are going to be. So make sure that you're pushing for that. Make sure you have clarity on that. And then make sure that you can tie your impact and what you're doing to the overall company goals. I think I recently had the opportunity to talk to 10 odd content and SEO managers across the country recently. And it was a mixed bag, but most of them, when you say what is one of the biggest challenges for you in your role, almost all of them said it's the fact that their higher level leadership doesn't understand SEO, doesn't understand organic, doesn't understand the time it takes, the fact that there are fluctuations in the algorithm. And so it's one of those things that can be easily deprioritized and say, go work on something else. But when that happens, you never have the time to do it right. You never have the time to focus on it. So you're never going to see the results you want. And now you're just stuck in this loop. So I would really encourage you to try to find the time to align with those goals and make sure that there's understanding across all of the leadership. Second, if you do want to scale, creating a documented style guide, tone, brand voice, call it what you want. But having that documented and again, aligned throughout your department is really important because whether you work with freelancers, you're onboarding new folks, you're trying to support other people throughout the company, you're going to spend the time one way or the other. You're either going to spend it having to re-edit things, having to explain to multiple people what you want it to look like, what you want it to sound like, or you can try to carve out a dedicated amount of time to create a thorough style guide, thorough tone of voice, Do you use the Oxford comma? Do you not use the Oxford comma? And to create that consistency throughout. And that, I think, is a foundational element to help you scale long-term for your content. I also highly recommend repurposing. I know I got a couple questions on this for some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time during registration. We definitely will be doing a future webinar all about repurposing. But if you're trying to scale and do more with less, repurposing is so important, and repurposing even throughout the journey. So there's a lot of ways that this can be called, micro content, pillar content, hub and spoke model, but really thinking and thinking about a theme, thinking about a topic cluster for a certain period of time that you want to go after, and creating those really meaty, long form ebooks, guides, long form blog posts, and then repurposing it across the board. So maybe you start and it is that really great long form informational blog, and then you create a product page or maybe a more bottom of funnel product focus that can link to it. Maybe you create a checklist off of it and now you can gate that and do some lead generation. Maybe you have something that's a little more practical that includes a customer story, and now sales can use that to help overcome any objections that they might get on the sales cycle. And there's a little bit of additional work to kind of recreate that for those different uses, but not nearly as much as having to, from scratch, recreate each of those, every single time. So highly recommend repurposing and being thoughtful and trying to find that opportunity. And that really comes with planning. And then I do think it is worth considering finding a partner to take writing or whatever you need off your plate that can scale to your needs. At Composely, that is obviously what we have the most experience doing. And so just kind of sharing, like, why would customers work with us? What do we hear? What is the benefit of it? One of the other findings from the SEO, at Search Engine Journal State of SEO report, so many acronyms with so many S's in them, but is that they found in their survey results that people are concerned about finding qualified talent over the next 2 years. And so being able to find that specifically at a budget or in an agreement that can be flexible with budget, that can be flexible to the business needs. Again, it all goes back to aligning with where the company is at, what the company needs. So outsourcing allows you to have a little bit more flexibility depending on where the company is at. It can also de-risk content production, because if you have your style guide lives in someone's head and they move on from the company or go get another opportunity, now that has just gone out the door and all of that internal knowledge is gone. And that is another reason why I very much recommend having something documented. And then there are certain things that you're just not going to be able to outsource, like creating EAT. Again, there is no silver bullet, easy way to do it. You're going to have to put the work in internally and do some things to create that and generate scalable foundational resources for you to use throughout your content. And so being able to outsource to someone who knows how to write really well and you're feeding them that EAT can allow you to really focus and keep the things that often get deprioritized, prioritized. And this is a lot of what we see and why it's helpful. Of course, there are some reasons why you want to keep it in-house, having someone that can be consistent with it, having someone who wakes up every day thinking about that is also obviously very important. So we are wrapping up here. And thank you to everyone who has stayed on. Hopefully you did walk away with that incremental piece of knowledge. I would encourage you, if you have any questions, to start putting them in chat. We're going to be moving to Q&A here soon. But did want to launch just one final poll. So if you are interested, as you head to the end of the year, of looking for someone to help support content, I am just going to throw up a quick poll here. Let us know if you're interested and we'll get you to the right person. But while that is up and rolling, do you want to just kind of go through some of the key takeaways for me coming off of this? Really, to recap, think about that human. What are their goals? What are they searching for? Where are they in their journey? And how are you uniquely qualified to help them? And document that. Document why you are uniquely qualified to help them and how that is, that anyone can come in and help you create that. Second is finding the time to prioritize developing that authority and that thought leadership. EAT is not going to happen without dedicated focus. And so making sure that you can explain why you need to prioritize that time, why you might need some budget and resources to get that proprietary data, or talking to your CS leader about why you might need an hour of their delivery team's time to pull the knowledge out of their heads and be able to articulate that back to the market. Unfortunately, time and focus is the only way that you're really going to be able to develop that. And then finally, I do really recommend having that documented style guide. It is going to help you scale. It is going to help you be able to find the right resource, no matter what that looks like. Third party, a freelancer that you know, or a freelancer that you used to work with, who you need to come in and just kind of pitch hit for a minute, or you're hiring people internally, or people are getting moved around. And maybe you have someone from a different department, or you need to ask product to kind of pitch hit on some copy inside the product. Being able to provide them with a style guide means that it's going to save you time later from having to edit it and basically recreate it anyways. So that is the recap. We made it through. We have about 10 minutes for questions, and I'll get you guys on your way. Thank you so much for sticking in and hoping that you guys found something valuable here. So first question, what is the recommended word count per online article? This is a great question. The broad answer is it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish with it. I would say if your goal, though, is to provide enough content so that the algorithm and Google can really understand what it's about, but also not so much that you're probably not going to get people to really engage with it, I'd say ideally you're looking around that 1,500 to 2,000 word mark. But again, there are reasons to use smaller and longer posts. So having something smaller, especially if it is a super informational or transactional query, getting to that main point, making sure that you've answered what they need and that they can consume it and move on to the next thing. You might only need 800 to 1,000 words there. Also seeing a lot of folks lean into longer, meatier pieces of content that might be closer to 4,000 words, and providing a lot of examples, providing links to other resources that at any point in time, if they're ready to move on from that 4,000 to go somewhere else, I would say those need to have really strong interlinking strategies. But core average, I would say about 1,500 to 2,000 words per article. Also have a question that was submitted ahead of time around what type of content is crawlable by Google. So of course, anything that's image-based, you can't search an image. They don't know what that is, which is where on the technical side, making sure that you have descriptive alt text for any image or video that is included is going to be really important to help Google understand what that is. Anything that's written, as long as you have it as indexed on your website, Google is going to be able to crawl it. But just because, that image or that video itself doesn't have content that can be crawled, doesn't mean that it doesn't have benefits on things that we talked about. Videos can help establish your authority. It can help people maybe actually get the answer of what they're looking for. Again, I was talking to someone who, I think this is such a great example. If you are going to go play a new board game, a lot of times now you have the written instructions, and that's great. And if you were probably Googling, how to play Uno or whatever, you're going to have that really long list of here's how to play and here are all the written directions. But sometimes people just need to visualize it. And so a lot of board games now have QR codes that you can scan, and that'll take you to YouTube, and you'll see a YouTube video of how people are setting it up or how people play, so that the written and visual side kind of come together. And so even if that's not crawlable, still recommend investing in video and figuring out how to include some infographics or video into that content. Looking through here. One other question was, how to use expert content if you do use a freelancer or, even if it's an in-house, junior writer who maybe doesn't have that expertise. So a few things to think about. Most times, whether it's a freelancer or it's a company like Composely, you're going to have a white labeling, ghost written agreement here so that if you did want to outsource it and then have your customer success, your delivery, your in-house SME be the author of it, that is oftentimes what happens. You can also look for writers who have their own credibility and their own experience in the space. So for instance, we have a lot of, folks who are CPAs who can write about finance content, or worked there themselves, or maybe they didn't work there and work in the industry, but have kind of niched in a space and have a lot of cycles writing to the industry and understanding the regulation, where you can write a compelling bio for third-party writers or third-party freelancers that still provide you that recommendation. I was talking with one of our customers who's in like the healthcare space for pets. And one of the things that they did is, they wrote their content, but they don't have any vets on staff. So they went and built relationships with vets in the community and would have them thoroughly review and add thoughts to posts so that they could include quotes from them. They could add, has been reviewed by this person with a link to a bio or bio page or their LinkedIn. Again, and the image I showed earlier from Lily Ray, like that alone is not going to night and day change your authority, but it is a nice step. And it is a way to kind of bring that credibility on site. And so that's a great way, is to find someone to review content if you don't have the internal muscle to kind of produce that authority yourself. Another question here, and this might be our last one, so if you have any others, get them in now because I want to make sure I get you out on time. But great question here. It says, my company seems to think more content is always better, which has resulted in lots of low impact, low quality pages. Do you agree with quantity over quality? And if not, do you have an effective counter argument? What a great question. Again, going to start with the quantity and quality is always going to be dependent on what your goals are. And also a little bit of the reality of your space. If you're going against competitors that have 20, 50, 60% more content than you do, you're going to want to look at upping the volume in order to better compete, because they just have more at bats. They have more content to be crawled. But if it's low quality, you're not getting what you need out of that. Like, you produce more content because you want to see the rankings increase. And if that isn't happening, are you achieving your goal? Like, that would be my counter argument, is you want to do more content, but is the increase in content achieving our goals? I'm going to use organic traffic because it's an easy one, not fully understanding your business. But if the goal is to create more content because you want to rank for more keywords, that ultimately leads to more organic traffic, which then should ultimately lead to a higher conversion rate, which should then lead to more revenue. If you're not seeing the rankings increase, you feel like they're low quality pages, you're no longer achieving that goal. And so I do think it is realistic to push back and say, let's, not cut it off completely, but let's maybe be really thoughtful about the content we're putting out and proving that we know, I'm sure you do know, but proving the numbers that the higher quality, lower quantity is producing the data impact and hitting the KPIs you're looking for before you try to scale it up. Because if you can prove it out lower, you could also probably make the business case for getting more resources so that you can spend more time on each page so that you don't feel like it has to be low quality. The other thing I will say, which thought about adding an entire section about this to point we're kind of already at time, but also thinking about optimizing content you already have. And so it might be worth taking a moment or taking a pause of creating a bunch of new content and making sure that you can go back and re-optimize. It is in your best interest to keep old content up to date, adding a last updated by on those pages, Google is consistently looking at that. And if you think that the low quality pages have an opportunity to be improved, perhaps that's the counter argument is, hey, instead of taking, just going to pick numbers for the sake of the example, but if you're doing, 10 posts a month right now, 20 posts a month, and that's not getting you what you need and you feel like it's low quality, maybe it's hey, let's go to 5 or 6 posts a month. And instead of doing a bunch of new content, we're going to do 5 to 6 new posts, and we're going to go back to 5 to 6 old posts and optimize them and increase that quality score, which will also have impact for you and will help you with your Eat in Authority, because it's going to show that you're staying up to date. You're not letting old content sit there. And if that content's not helpful anymore, it is going to actually drag you down. So that would be my recommendation. All right, we are wrapping up here. I do just want to thank you all again for joining. Hope that you got something out of this. If you're open and interested in sharing or connecting with me, I will be sending you that email here either this afternoon or first thing tomorrow morning, and would love to hear what you take away or what you would have loved to hear more of. So always looking to get better.